Hey guys, this is Just Coach Andrew Rankin. Welcome back to the series Buffing Your Black Repertoire. Today I wanted to show you guys a game I played against a 2436 rated opponent on Lichess.org. So I've recently said that I'm trying to climb up to 2400, and this was part of that process. So this was a very complicated game and very back and forth. Had to take some risks, but it actually turned out. You can see that my opponent ended up losing the game, but it was by no means an easy feat. So the game started with d4, d5, c4, the queen's gambit, c6, the Slav defense, knight to c3. I played knight to f6, your mainline Slav, and knight to f3. And then I followed up with the move a6 because I've been playing the Shebanenko Slav lately. Because I told you guys that I've been studying this line. I like it a lot. And now my opponent plays the move a4. And a4 here is definitely a critical move. One of the best moves. Let me turn off the best move arrow. And I've actually created a study and I have the a4 lines all in there, but I haven't looked at them recently. And after I played bishop to f5, which is a bit of a inaccuracy. Let me turn off the annotations on the board. I realized that I should have played the move e6. And after the move e6, and my opponent can do a number of things, but if my opponent doesn't play the move a5, eventually I'll play the move a5, with the idea of going knight a6, knight b4, and targeting this really weak b4 square. And you can also play a number of bishop to b4 and c5 ideas. And then later I think you can play like b6 and then bishop a6 and try and trade off the bishop. But I definitely need to go back and study the a4 lines because I know that there's lines where the bishop comes to b4, and I know there's lines where the knight comes to a6 and then b4, and I couldn't remember entirely what to do. So I decided I'd just play bishop to bishop to f5 and see where things go. So my opponent pushes a5, and he's really trying to lock things down on the queen side, which tells me that I need to break with e5, and that's going to be my game plan. So I played the move e6, just looking to develop my bishop and castle. So my opponent now develops his bishop to f4. The computer doesn't actually really like this move. Let's see how it wants us to punish this move. Imagine d takes c4 here is probably the way to go. So it wants d takes c4, e3, and then knight d5. Yeah, so the bishop here is a bit misplaced. But I just continued my development with knight b to d7. He pushed e3. I pushed h6 so that I give my bishop a pocket in case he wants to play knight to h4. I don't want to give him too many free resources. So he pushes h3 with the same idea. And now I play bishop to e7. He goes bishop to d3 looking to trade off pieces. And I castled. I wanted to create some imbalances here because I felt like I really needed something unique. Because if I give my opponent a very straightforward structure, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to fight back too hard, and we might just end up with a draw. But I knew that if I could create some imbalances, that my opponent wouldn't necessarily know exactly what to do. The computer absolutely hates this move. It says it's +2 after bishop takes, pawn takes, because this pawn is weak and this pawn is weak, but at least I get a nice clamp over the e4 square. The key, though, is not losing this pawn after knight to e4, pawn takes, knight takes. So I had an idea of playing like bishop b4 and then knight to e4. But my opponent immediately goes after the f5 square, and the computer doesn't really like this, and I took on c4 and my opponent took on f5. So I have this pawn here. I'm not sure that it's super great. I might end up losing it, but at least I created the open e file and the open d file. White is still slightly better out of the opening, but we definitely have a game on our hands. So I continued with bishop to b4, looking to create some imbalances, jump the knight into d5. My opponent decides to castle. and I played bishop takes c3, and the computer really doesn't like this move, but my idea was that after pawn takes, I play knight to d5, and I'm looking to give him the same damaged pawn structure that I have to play with. Now he goes bishop to d6, and I put the rook on the e file, and now he plays rook here, defending the pawn, and I decide to bring my knight to f6, and here it says that white is completely winning. All he has to really do is play bishop to e5 and start trading pieces. But he doesn't do that. He plays bishop to c5. And now I get this nice e4 square. My knights are actually really strong here, and it's not so clear how he's going to deal with all my pawns, all my pieces being on light squares, and his dark square bishop, which is actually not really finding a lot of targets. And he jumps the knight into e5, and the computer absolutely hates my next move. It just wants knight takes on c5, so it wants knight takes c5, pawn takes c5, and then the game can continue, and we have weaknesses and targets to go after. But my opponent had 6.5 minutes left, and I had 7.5, so I had a slight time advantage. And again, I really just felt like if I could put some pressure on my opponent and make the position extremely imbalanced, that these two knights would end up being quite strong. And I also have like easy access over to his king side, and notice his rooks are really trying to break open on the b7 pawn. And if I can stop his rooks from entering the game, swing a couple rooks up and over with my queen, then we can create plenty of counterplay. So I sacked the rook on e5. He played queen takes, and now I played knight e takes on c3. And my opponent brought the rook up to c2. So my threat here is knight to e2 check, and then winning back the exchange. So he brings his rook here, and I improve my queen to d7. My idea is to put the rook on the e file so that I can continue to put pressure and potentially do a rook lift. So he doubles up on the c file, putting pressure on my knight so that he can win the c pawn, but I'm not really sure that winning back the c pawn is so great. So my disadvantage, the evaluation of the position, is actually getting closer and closer to +1. And a +1 when you're down in exchange is really not that bad. It's still anyone's game. So I played rook to e8, attacking the queen, and the queen slides over to h5. This is a good move by him because I really want to bring my queen in, but he still controls that square. I dropped the knight back to e4 because I don't want to lose it, and he took on c4. That's his plan, but it's still not clear what these two rooks are actually doing. The only way in is through b7, and I'm not going to make it so easy for him to attack. So now I play knight to d2, and the computer really doesn't like this move because it's kind of just a one-move threat, but I'm really trying to dislocate his pieces. So he drops back, and now I go to e4 and kind of just asking him, like, what's your game plan? He brings the queen back to e2, and I seize on this opportunity to bring my queen into f5. Now he pushes the pawn to f3, and now I felt like I was definitely making progress because you see all these dark squares around the king. Whenever you create Swiss cheese around your king and your opponent has queens and knights attacking you, the knights can end up being super strong. And you'll see that my opponent goes wrong really quick. So here, even though my opponent is +3, about to be +4, he has a completely winning position, it is by no means easy to play. If a 2400 rated player can easily completely blow his advantage, then so can I, and so can you. So after f3, I played the knight into g3, attacking the queen, so taking advantage of one of these weak squares. And now he played queen to f2. I dropped the queen back to g6. I really liked that I was putting pressure on the rook on c2. I was defending my knight, and I was allowing the knight to take here, and then potentially winning the rook. Also, if this pawn falls, then the e2 square becomes quite weak, where my rook and my knight coordinate, which would be a check and a fork. So my knights, my queen and my rook, my pieces are all very active, and it's not so easy for white to defend. People also hate defending, so because it's just easy to go wrong, and it really starts to put him in time pressure. So at this point, he has 3 minutes left, and I have 4 minutes and 20 seconds left. I should also note that this game was really cool because I think probably a minute in, there was a flood of people that started watching the game, something like 15 to 20 people, which means that our game was the highest rated game playing on Lichess Rapid at the time, and so it was featured on Lichess TV. So there was a lot of people watching. I felt like the added pressure was going to be harder for my opponent than for me. So he pushes the pawn to e4, and now my knight can jump into f4. And I have the same situation where I had my knights sitting on these beautiful outpost square, but now they're even closer to the king. And my queen is potentially creating tactical opportunities against his king. And the evaluation goes from +4 to -6 in one move. So after rook to b1, my opponent loses his entire advantage and completely throws the game. So hopefully your guys' spidey senses are tingling now, and you guys can find some really strong moves for black. So take your time here. If you need more time, go ahead and pause the video, but hopefully you guys found the move knight takes e4. And the idea here is that if pawn takes knight, we have knight takes h3, forking the king and the queen. So after knight takes e4, we still have the threat of knight takes h3, and my opponent needs to deal with his hanging queen and can't really address the fact that the knight here on e4 wants to be taken. So my opponent plays queen to f1, and now I continue with knight takes h3 check. His king slides over to h2, but I have queen to g3 check, sending him back here. And now this knight, which is hanging, can jump into f2. And he actually has no squares that he can move his king, so he has to sacrifice the rook. I take with the knight, and now instead of being down the exchange, I'm plus 2 pawns because I win back the exchange, and I'm up the 2 pawns that I originally was. So black has gotten back all the material and then some. Now the king has to go to g1. We give the knight check on h3, bringing the knight out. The king slides over, and I put the knight on f4. Now my opponent plays bishop to d6, and the game is basically over. So hopefully you guys can find the next series of moves that allow black to just completely crush the game. So if you need more time, pause your videos, but queen to h4 check, king to g1, and then knight to e2 check. And the king has no squares, so the queen has to sacrifice herself. The rook takes, and now we have lots of threats such as queen f2 check, and then queen takes g2, which is checkmate, and we also have queen d4 check, winning the bishop. So the best move here is to block the mate threat on f2, but then we have queen takes pawn, and then queen takes bishop, and black is completely winning. So my opponent resigned after knight to e2, and all the 20 people were probably like, yeah, the under 2300 rated player crushed that over 2400 rated player. So I thought this was a really instructive example of how sacrificing a rook creates a lot of dynamic opportunities, and if you keep fighting, there are always opportunities to win games. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I'll catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.